Ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
All right, so today we're tackling a book that's, well, kind of everywhere. The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Oh, a classic.
Yeah, and I'll admit, the first time I heard that title, I thought, okay, this is going to be intense.
Haha. Yeah, it sounds a bit out there. I get it.
But honestly, it's not about, like, chanting on a mountaintop or anything.
No, not at all. It's actually surprisingly grounded.
Right. Tolle's main thing is that true happiness, that peace we all want. It's not something we got to chase after. It's already within us.
We just got to access it right here, right now.
Easier said than done, though, am I right? Our minds are like, well, kind of always going.
Always. It's nonstop, that mental chatter.
Exactly. And that's where Tolle's first big idea really hits home. You are not your mind.
Ah, yes, that's a game changer right there.
Right. Because we get so caught up in our thoughts, all that mental noise.
We think it's who we are. I'm thinking this, so I must be this.
It's like we're lost in this movie playing in our heads.
And we forget we're the ones holding the remote.
Yes, totally. Like just the other day, I was replaying this awkward coffee shop encounter over and over.
Oh, no.
And it just like ruined my morning, letting that mental loop totally control my mood.
And that's what overthinking does. It creates so much unnecessary suffering.
Oh, the word.
Tolle actually compares it to like a dog with a bone just gnawing on the same problem
I like that.
over and over again. And it's not that thinking is bad, right?
Of course not. We need to think.
But we got to recognize when it's helpful and when it's just keeping us stuck.
Totally. And what I love about Tolle's approach is he's not saying we should become like thought-free zombies.
No, not at all.
It's about choosing, right?
Yes.
Consciously deciding when to engage with those thoughts and when to just let them be.
Exactly. Creating space between us and the thoughts, just witnessing them without judgment.
And watching clouds drift by.
Yes. You see them, you acknowledge them, but you don't grab onto each one.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. Just let them float on by.
So we're starting to see how powerful it can be to detach from that mental chatter, right?
Absolutely.
But then Tolle throws in this whole other concept, the pain body.
Ah, yes, the pain body.
And I'm not going to lie, this one kind of threw me for a loop at first.
It's definitely one of those things you got to wrap your head around.
Yeah. So for those who are new to this, what is the pain body?
Okay, so imagine this. There's this, well, invisible entity inside us, made up of all our accumulated emotional pain.
So all the hurt, the resentment, the fear we've collected over the years.
Well, exactly. All of that. It's like a shadow self, and it feeds on negativity.
Whoa. Okay, so it's not just that we have these negative thoughts. There's this entity, this pain body that's actually trying to keep those negative cycles going.
Exactly. And it wants to survive, so it whispers those negative thoughts, it triggers old patterns, even tries to recreate painful situations in our lives just to get its fix.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like, why do I sometimes react to things so out of proportion?
See? That's the pain body at work.
Wild. But if we're aware of it, can we do something about it?
That's the good news. Once you see it, you can start to disarm it. It hates the light of awareness, so just by shining that light on it, you start to diminish its power.
So we've talked about how our minds can kind of be our own worst enemies, right? And this whole pain body thing, keeping us stuck.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
But how do we actually escape that? How do we tap into that power of now that Tolle's always talking about?
Well, it starts by understanding how much we get caught up in what he calls psychological time.
Psychological time. Okay, so not just like regular time on a clock.
Right, exactly. Clock time is useful, of course. Got to schedule things.
Right, got to make it to appointments on time.
Exactly. But psychological time, that's a whole different beast.
Okay, how so?
It's the way our minds are constantly dragging us into the past.
Oh, I know that feeling. Reliving old arguments, cringing at past mistakes, all that.
Exactly. Or it launches us into the future, worrying about stuff that hasn't even happened.
Oh, the dreaded what-ifs. I am the queen of what-if scenarios.
And that's the problem with psychological time. It steals us away from the only moment we actually have. The present.
I mean, he's got a point, right? The present moment really is all there is.
Exactly. As Tolle says, the present moment is all you ever have.
Okay, that makes sense, but like, how do we actually live that way? Our minds are so used to this time traveling thing.
It takes practice, definitely. But Tolle offers some really helpful tools. One of the simplest but most powerful is just bringing awareness to our senses.
So, like, really paying attention to what we see, hear, smell, touch, taste, right here, right now.
Exactly. Instead of being lost in thought, you might notice The way the sunlight feels on your skin,
Oh, yeah.
the sound of birds outside, the taste of your coffee.
It's like hitting pause on that mental movie and actually tuning into what's around us.
Exactly. And another powerful practice is focusing on the breath. Our breath is always with us in the present moment. It's like an anchor that brings us back whenever we find ourselves drifting.
Oh, I like that. The breath is an anchor. He uses a really cool analogy in the book, too. Talks about finding the narrow gate of the present moment.
Oh, yes, I love that analogy.
It's like we're trying to escape this room, right?
Right.
This crowded, chaotic room full of mental clutter,
And the only way out is through this tiny little door.
which is the present moment.
Yes.
And on the other side of that door is this vast, open space of nowness.
It's such a powerful image, right? It reminds us that no matter how crazy our thoughts are, how chaotic things feel, that present moment is always there.
We just have to choose to walk through that door.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's super helpful for like day-to-day life.
Hmm.
But then Tolle takes this idea even further, right? With this concept of the unmanifested.
Ah, yes, the unmanifested.
And this is where I gotta admit, it starts to get a little mind-bendy for me.
It's definitely entering a more mystical realm, for sure.
Okay, so for those of us who are like just dipping our toes into this,
Yeah.
what is the unmanifested?
Okay, so think of it this way. It's like the formless, timeless essence that underlies everything, the source of all creation.
So if the universe is like a giant ocean, the unmanifested would be like the deep, still water way below the surface.
Exactly. It's that pure being, that oneness, beyond all the waves and ripples of our thoughts and emotions.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. But how do we actually access that? It's not like there's a map to get there, right?
Right. But Tolle talks about what he calls portals to the unmanifested. These are practices or moments of awareness that can give us glimpses into this deeper dimension of reality.
Like those moments when you're so engrossed in something you totally lose track of time?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Those are glimpses of the unmanifested.
Wow. Okay, so what are some of these portals?
Well, one of the key ones Tolle talks about is through the inner body.
So not just our physical body, but like the energy within.
Yes, exactly. Shifting our attention from the thinking mind to the feeling body. Becoming aware of the subtle sensations, the aliveness that's always present within us.
And by connecting with our inner body, we can start to tap into that deeper stillness, that presence beyond thought.
Precisely. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Another portal Tully describes is the cessation of thought.
Wait, so not just observing our thoughts, but actually experiencing moments of complete silence in the mind.
You got it. And it's not about forcing our minds to be quiet, which is near impossible, right?
Wait, we've established that.
It's more about becoming aware of the spaces between thoughts, those little gaps of stillness that naturally happen when we're not actively thinking about something.
Like when you're totally absorbed in a creative project or lost in the beauty of nature.
Yes. Those moments where we're fully present without the usual mental chatter, those are portals to the unmanifested.
Wow, okay. It sounds like there are all these little entry points to this deeper reality all around us, if we just know how to look for them.
Exactly. And then there's one final portal Talay discusses, one that, well, none of us can avoid. Conscious death.
Okay, now we're getting serious.
Right. It's a big one.
But he's not talking about, like, actual physical death, right?
No, not in a morbid sense. He's talking about the death of our ego, our limited sense of self.
So letting go of all the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, the fears, insecurities, all that.
Exactly. And he says it's possible to experience this kind of death consciously, to fully embrace the transition and merge with that formless dimension of being.
That's intense. So by accessing these portals, whether it's through our inner body, the cessation of thought, even conscious death, we're basically freeing ourselves from the limitations of our ego, right? Connecting with something much bigger.
Exactly. It's about realizing that we're not just these separate selves, but part of something so much vaster, something interconnected, even divine.
That's beautiful, but also kind of a lot to take in.
It is. And achieving that sense of freedom, that deep inner peace that Tolle talks about, well, it requires a certain level of surrender. And that's something we can unpack more in the final part of our deep dive.
So we've covered a lot of ground, from quieting the mind to those portals to a deeper reality. But there's one more piece of the puzzle we got to unpack. Surrender.
And I know that word surrender, it can be a bit loaded for people, right?
Totally. It can sound like, I don't know, giving up, like waving a white flag.
Exactly. But that's not what Tolle means at all. It's not about resigning yourself to a bad situation or becoming passive. It's more about aligning yourself with the way things are, with the flow of life, instead of constantly swimming upstream against it.
Okay, so less about giving up and more about
Yes.
Letting go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Letting go of that need to control everything, that resistance we have to things not going exactly how we want them to go.
Which, let's be honest, is like 90% of our stress, right?
Mhm.
Trying to force everything to fit into this perfect little box.
It's exhausting. And it actually blocks us from experiencing the peace and joy that's already present if you just step out of our own way. Tolle uses this great image. He says it's like clenching your fist really tight. You can't receive anything new until you open your hands.
Wow, yeah, that really makes you think.
Right. And that's where the real change happens, when we finally surrender and let go of that tight grip we have on everything.
So true. It's like in that letting go, we actually create space for something new to emerge.
Exactly. And it's not always easy. Tolle actually talks about how some of the most challenging things we go through, loss, heartbreak, even illness, those can actually become the biggest doorways to surrender.
Because in those moments when we're stripped of everything we thought we knew, everything we thought defined us, we're forced to confront something deeper.
Exactly. And it's in that space of surrender, of letting go, that we often find a strength and a resilience we never knew we had. It's like we tap into this whole other source of power, something beyond our little ego selves.
That's amazing. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into the power of now, what are some key things that really stood out to you? Stuff that our listeners can take with them and actually use in their lives.
Well, first and foremost, remember, you are not your mind. You are that awareness, that presence behind the thoughts. You get to choose which thoughts to engage with and which ones to just let float on by.
It's so easy to forget that. We get so caught up in those thought loops.
Totally. And speaking of getting caught up, don't underestimate the power of the breath. Whenever you feel yourself getting pulled into those thought spirals, just take a few deep, conscious breaths. It's like a mini vacation for your mind.
Love that. Okay, any other parting words of wisdom from Eckhart Tolle?
Be kind to yourself. This whole living in the now thing, it's a practice. It's not about being perfect at it. Some days you'll be super present, other days not so much, and that's okay. Just keep coming back to this present moment with curiosity and compassion.
I love that. This has been so insightful. I feel like I need to go back and reread The Power of Now. Now with fresh eyes.
You definitely should. It's one of those books that takes on new meaning every time you read it.
So true. And for our listeners, if you're feeling inspired to explore these ideas further, pick up a copy of The Power of Now and dive in. It's a journey, but it's so worth it. And until next time, remember, the present moment is all you ever have. So how will you choose to spend it?